the 80s slasher librarian.
Good evening, boils and ghouls. What did you think of the new opening? Tonight's story is Tales from the Crypt, Demon Night, Chapter 13. It took Roach and Martell only 10 minutes to smash the little hole in the wall into a crater that even Irene, being big-boned and full-figured, could wriggle through. Geralene had been hanging in the background watching the two work, still immensely troubled by what she had seen on the door of the bathroom. So far, the salesman had not approached her in any personal way, had not singled her out for the kind of treatment he had given Cordelia. But that thing with the bathroom door, that little ghoul's room, how much power did the man have? If he could manage her perception of reality, he possessed all the ammunition he needed to seek her out and destroy her. But the oddest thing was that after she'd used the restroom and come back out, the sign simply said employees only again. So had she imagined the whole thing? Or was the salesman capable of driving her slowly insane? Roach, glistening with sweat and enveloped in a fog of locker room stench, tossed the pickaxe aside and lifted up the belly of his t-shirt to mop his forehead. Martell dusted his hands, seeming not quite as winded as Roach. "Okay, where's Willie?" Roach asked, swiveling his head, squinting through the dust. "He's supposed to be the mining expert." Irene had a Kleenex pressed to her nose. "I sent him up to the kitchen for a bottle of vodka, and that's all it took. Guess I got stupid and started feeling sorry for the bum. I'll go fetch the old dude," Martell said, and coughed. He worked his jaw and spat on the ground, ground it into the dirt with the toe of one boot, then plodded away. Geralene's stomach performed a slow, greasy roll, and she moved to where Breaker stood, idly holding the flashlight. "Changed your mind about getting out through the mines?" she asked him. He jerked his shoulders. "If you don't all end up killed in there, you're going to wind up like Cordelia. So I might as well be on hand to end it." "End it?" He glanced wearily at her. "Kill you. When you belong to the salesman, you're my enemy. I pop you with a drop of blood, you die, and I live on to guard the key." "Oh, the blood," she said, "like you still have a lot of it." "It'll do," he said. "Whose blood is it anyway?" she asked. "Yours?" He was silent for a time, and then, "Most of it belongs to a man named Harrison." "Harrison? Who the hell is that?" "Just a man I knew." "A wonderful explanation, Breaker. Who else donated to the cause?" "Other men," he said, "and women too." "Sounds like the Red Cross work, collecting blood. Whose idea was it, Dracula's?" He didn't smile. "Not funny." "Who then? How did it all start, and when?" He drew himself up taller, eyeing her. "I'm not sure you're ready to hear it yet." "What? I have to be older? It can't be told to a minor? Dirty words, the sale of alcohol involved, violence and nudity?" He seemed to want to smile, but the effort died before his lips got the message. The whole effect was visible only in his eyes. "I'd rather tell you in private," he said quietly. "It's a fairly long story." Around the corner of the coal room, distantly, the ladder creaked and groaned. Presently, Martell appeared, practically carrying Uncle Willie, who was glassy-eyed and mumbling. "The weirdest thing," Martell said, letting him fall. Dust puffed up in a cloud. "In the kitchen there's confetti hanging through the outside door. Some spangly things all over the floor. I guess Willie had himself one hell of a party." Breaker tensed. He put the flashlight on the floor, looking all kinds of strange. As Geralene watched, baffled, he pulled the key from its pouch and stalked over to where Willie lay moaning in the dirt. In a swift movement, he bent and touched it to Willie's forehead, nervously ready to spring back. Aha, Geralene thought, the old touch-and-run monster test. "He's clean," Breaker said, straightening. He stuffed it away and readjusted his shirt. Roach had reclaimed his shotgun. "Screw the old bastard," he said. "Let's get the hell out of here." He stooped and peered through the hole. "Black as a coon's asshole. Breaker, did I hear you say you was coming or not?" Coming, Breaker said. Roach swept an arm. You first, Kemosabe. You've got the magic key. Geralene handed Breaker the flashlight. And you've got the magic shotgun, he said to Roach. Willie came alive and began the slow process of getting to his feet. Barbarashickle, he informed everyone with cross-eyed dignity. Revislip, hoo-ah! Roach went to him. See the hole in the wall, Unky? Can you walk your drunk ass to it? Basil, Willie said. Basil cake. Uh-huh. Irene stomped over behind Roach, looking like a large walking fish in her lime green pantsuit, and kicked him squarely in the butt. Lay off the man, she brayed. He was fighting pink elephants while the best half of you was drying up on your mama's bed sheet. He whirled. Fuck you, you old bag of shit, he snarled. You don't have the pecker for it, white boy, she shouted back. I do too. Good. Irene put on a great fake smile. Prove your courage by going into that mine shaft first, big shot. I will, he howled. Just watch me. He marched to the hole, dropped to his knees, and crawled through, his dirty black shoes scraping and clunking. Did it! His voice came back. So who's next? I guess we are, Martell said, and pointed Uncle Willie in the right direction. Give us a minute. Geralene leaned toward Breaker. Looks like Irene has a soft spot for old Willie, she said softly. Bad times can bring two things out of people, he replied. Their natural goodness or their natural badness. She raised an eyebrow. Breaker the philosopher, she said, her voice tainted with friendly sarcasm. You seem wise beyond your years. And what a pile of years they are, he said, and fell silent, staring down at the thick white beam of the flashlight and the currents of dust moving through it. She wondered if she had hit a sensitive nerve, then gave a mental big deal. He had acted like a jerk when they first met not too many hours ago, so who cared? Who cared if she had somehow hurt his little feelings? He raised his head suddenly. Shall we go? Irene's green fanny was disappearing into the blackness at the other side of the hole. Geralene crawled through, then Breaker. He stood and aimed the flashlight around. Old, Geralene breathed. Wow. The mine shaft had been cut just deep enough to stand in. Despite the parched earth overhead, these rocky walls were damp in spots, hairy with spiderwebs whose owners had died and shriveled in their own homes before Geralene was ever born. Crusty and orange with rust, a narrow pram track cut down the middle of the floor. The mossy smell of stagnant water hung in the air. It seemed obvious, or at least plausible, that the miners had cut this shaft through to the foundation of the building and said, whoops, after making a little hole and looking through. Or, of course, a lot of years' worth of rats could have gnawed their way in, as if any of that mattered any more. I need the light up here, Roach said. His voice seemed to boom out, rebounded 4 or 5 times in a creepy, deepening echo, and was gone. Please, he said more softly. Breaker touched Geralene's elbow and made motions for her to follow, if she wanted. Consternation welled up in her. Half of the time, this guy was a moody loner, the other half a courteous Boy Scout. If he would just give away that stupid key, they could both leave tonight, hitchhike out of her parole jurisdiction, start real lives. But no, she had already offered him that, and he had chosen to keep the key. Fine. If this mineshaft led to the world above, she would do her hitchhiking all alone. Breaker took the lead with Roach while she hung back in the company of Irene and Willie and Deputy Martell. The sights and sounds of this tunnel, the damp smell in the air, and the harshly cutting beam of light reminded her in a strange way of the women's prison in Colorado at night, especially in the solitary block where all the stink and the wetness sank down from the prison above, and the guards raked the bars with their flashlights when they got bored. Fork in the road, Roach sang out. Echoes replied as everyone came to a stop. Old man, do your thing. Martell stepped forward, supporting Willie. Can you think straight? He asked him. Does any of this look familiar? Breaker waved a hand indicating time out. I don't think he's ever been down here, he said. He was an investor, knew all the maps. Roach poked the barrel of the shotgun against the tunnel's floor and leaned his weight on it.
"Oh, this is just swell," he said. "The drunk leading the blind."
Breaker looked over to him. "Ready to call this off? Go back and wait for morning?"
"No way!"
Roach smacked the barrel with the side of his foot. The shotgun spun around quite professionally, and he parked it on his shoulder, ready to march.
"American veteran National Guard," he said. "Suck on that."
"To the left is north," Willie slurred. "Feeder line to the main. No load, no vein, no nothing. Oh, I lost my ass."
Irene frowned. "What?" Martell shook Willie. "Which direction leads to the surface, old man, left or right?"
"That there is the south spur, takes you up like an escalator, unless we're headed south, which would make it..."
His eyes opened and shut in slow motion.
"Where in the hell?"
Roach made a noise approximating the blowing of a nose.
"Toss that old fucker back through the hole," he grumbled. "I think the shaft on the left angles up. Breaker?"
Breaker shook his head in the same slow motion Willie had used.
"I have no idea. Besides, this is your parade."
Roach swallowed.
I know. We'll go left. 50% chance. What the hell? We can always come back."
"Until we take another 2 or 3 forks after that," Irene said. "That's how scuba divers die in underwater caves. They get all lost. We ought to leave some kind of trail."
"Fresh out of road flares and breadcrumbs," Roach said.
Irene smiled sweetly. "We can always follow the trail of your fleas."
"We'll try the left," Breaker said. "At least for a minute or two."
They looked at each other, nodded mutual consent, and walked on. Geralene lagged behind, mulling over what Irene had said about scuba divers. Was it possible to get that damn lost down here? To die of thirst? Maybe cannibalize each other? No way, she was just tweaking a little. At the fork, where miners long dead had chopped the rock into a pockmarked surface like the moon and left a sharp vertical edge, she heard something drift from the right. She lifted a hand ready to call out to the others, then stopped herself in mid-breath. They couldn't all be trotting around chasing echoes hither and yon. She stayed in place only about 30 seconds, time enough to think there might be bats scratching around down the right tunnel, bats who ought not be disturbed. Besides, she was alone. The others had gone around a bend and been swallowed by the earth, save for a shuddering glow of light in that solid darkness. She lifted a foot, abandoning ship before a case of the scaredy cats could get her jumping at ghosts. Again came a sound. It seemed like a groan, maybe a sob of some sort. She put her hand out and clutched the wall, turning again and listening intently. Somebody was crying. It sounded like a child. But a crying child down here? She thought of Breaker's so-called salesman, a trick. Lure her away from the others and turn her into what Cordelia had become. Geralene stopped at the point of actually entering the tunnel. She had a book of matches in her pocket. Of course, because no smoker ever left home without one. Matter of fact, a cigarette right now sounded simply fabulous. What better way to chase a case of the jitters away? But her cigarettes were far away and her matches were to be ersatz flashlights for now. Yet, should she risk lighting one? What if the salesman and his buddies were 10 feet in front of her, holding their breath, ready to shout "Surprise!" and scare her instantly to death? Oh, too many questions. She got the matches out of the back pocket of her Salvation Army jeans and struck one. She held it overhead, staring into the tunnel with huge eyes. Geralene, the owl woman. 1,000 bowls of light and shadow adorned the walls as before. The rusty pram track arrowed away into blackness. No salesman, no demons, just a severe case of the jitters, and someone sobbing. Barely breathing, sweat beginning to appear on her forehead and upper lip, Geralene trod softly between the narrow rails. The flame touched her fingers and she flapped the match away, licked her thumb and lit another and held it as high as the ceiling would allow. Cobwebs and dust swinging black shadows on the walls, water drops glistening like yellow gems. A poet would like this, she thought. Poets always liked weird places. The second match went out after introducing itself to her fingers, making her hiss and dance. She lit another, stuck it overhead, and saw the person who was making all the fuss. It was a kid. The kid looked at her. The kid was Danny, from over at the Eureka Cafe, the cute little guy who hated wormwood as much as Geralene did. The two had talked a few times here and there. Geralene knelt in front of him. "Danny, how in the hell did you get down here? Where's your mom and dad?" She moved to touch his shoulder, but he jerked away. In his dark brown eyes lurked an animal sort of terror Geralene had never seen before. The match burned her. "Shit!" she squealed, dropping it. She rose and did a furious little dance on it. "Cheap-ass matches! God!" she howled, tended her wounds with her tongue, blew on her finger knowing blisters would be erupting there soon. She switched hands and lit another. A pair of eyes glowed alive just to her right, and she cringed back, then saw who it was. "Homer, shit," she said, her voice full of relief. "What is everybody doing in the mines, hiding?" Homer ignored her. He slowly craned his head and looked down at Danny.
Why did you run away, son?
He asked in a strange, guttural voice. When he looked back up again, he fastened his eyes on Geralene.
Look what you've done to him, you nasty bitch,
he said.
You gotta pay the price.
Geralene took a backward step, knowing. She bumped into something soft and whirled. It was Wanda. Like Homer, she was still wearing the official Eureka Cafe apron. The pupils of her eyes were dull orange circles, instead of the usual animated black. "Oh, God," Geralene moaned. "Not both of you." Wanda's face twisted into a dull, stupid leer.
You've been naughty with Danny,
she rasped. On the outrush of her breath, Geralene smelled dried blood and decay.
You must pay the price.
The match fell from Geralene's fingers. She turned, tense to run, but Danny lurched forward and took her right leg in a bear hug. Instead, she dropped heavily to her knees. Wanda dug cold fingers through Geralene's hair. With a pig-like grunt, Homer took her head in his hands and began to twist it. Things in her neck snapped and clicked. She was able to bellow out a scream. Wanda reacted by jamming her entire fist into Geralene's mouth. Geralene kicked and bucked out of air, the muscles and tendons of her head wrenched to the breaking point, knowing that before they were done, her head would be completely torn off for the others to find. How long do you stay conscious while your head rolls away, she wondered, and then she blacked out. Chapter 14. It was an instinctive motion. Breaker was walking beside Roach when he heard Geralene scream. He spun to the side and jerked the shotgun cleanly out of Roach's hands. Turning swiftly in the suddenly crazy light from the big orange flashlight, he knocked Martell out of the way, ran a step, and plowed chest first into Irene's ample bazooms. Careened against the wall and rebounded into Uncle Willie's drunken path. Cursing, he disentangled himself and made it to the back of the fork of the tunnel. Cut a hard left with the echoes of his footfalls pounding back and forth, and honed in on the unmistakable gurgles and grunts of someone being either choked or smothered to death. It was a sound he had heard often enough. Dark shapes were bent over Geralene, whose blue jean legs were jerking and twisting as she fought. Breaker put on the brakes, tripped against a rail, and fell to his knees, still skidding along. Sharp rocks cut through his pants and through his skin, grated across the bones of his kneecaps. One of the figures jerked upright. Breaker aimed the flashlight its way, just some average Joe whose hair stuck up like bunches of weeds, whose eyes glowed an unhealthy red, and whose face had been drained of all color. This was no demon, Breaker knew. This was a man possessed. He fired while the shotgun was still at his hip. The top right quadrant of the man's head blew apart in a shower of blood and bone. The man staggered backward, then bared his teeth.
You there?
He said, while blood bubbled up to the lip of his exploded skull and began to sheet down his face.
Tried to steal my Bronco, eh? Tried to.
The other figure became erect. This was a woman in similar shape. One of her arms dead-ended in Geralene's mouth. As for Geralene, not too good. Her eyes were open and rolling twin circles of pure terror. Breaker pumped the shotgun and fired. The woman's shoulder blew apart and splashed against the wall. Geralene shuddered up to a sitting position and jerked the severed arm away from her mouth. An ugly blue necklace of ruptured blood vessels indicated the line where her neck would have split from her body. Something else moved. Breaker cycled the gun with one hand and saw one more shape, trained the barrel on it. No! Geralene coughed out. She rocked to her feet, grabbed at the figure and lurched toward Breaker with it. A little boy Breaker saw, pale as white wine, tear stains on his cheeks, dirt scuffed on his clothes. Breaker got a twinge of surprise. It was the kid from the cafe, the little shit who had foiled the attempted car thievery. "I know this kid," Geralene gasped. She fell against Breaker, clutching at his clothes, coughing a fine mist of blood against his shirt. It's Danny Long, local boy." Breaker urged them both aside. The man he had shot was wobbling all over the place, but the woman, unconcerned about her missing arm, had picked up a rock and was shambling toward him. "Not in front of Danny," Geralene rasped. "It's his mom." Breaker hesitated. It was a tough old world sometimes, but to see your parents gunned down, not that tough. He tossed the flashlight at Geralene and snatched the boy up by the back of his shirt. "Go!" he shouted, but the flashlight had smacked her on the knee and fallen to the floor of the shaft. She dropped down madly, scrabbling for it, while the beam skittered across the walls and ceiling. Then she was up and running. Danny's parents gobbled unhappy things as Breaker sprinted away, carrying his unusual luggage. "Hold up!" Breaker shouted at Geralene as she ran through the fork. She stopped and turned in a wash of fresh dust. He slowed enough to put Danny Long on his feet before dropping to his haunches to recover his breath. "Damn those cigarettes," he thought. "Haven't smoked since 1938 and still I get winded." He emitted a miserable chuckle. What a zany life he had led. It would be nothing but pure relief to get rid of the key. There were times when being dead sounded so much better than being alive. They're still coming," Geralene panted. Blood was running from the corners of her lips, and her upper teeth had acquired some odd new angles and spaces. To cap this unfortunate beauty treatment, large clumps of her hair had been pulled out by the roots, which were now not bleeding but oozing a watery pinkish fluid. If she were to be the next keeper of the key, Breaker knew, she'd better get used to looking like shit most of the time. Yeah, if. A strange, windy rustling began in the darkness of the left passageway, as if Roach and crew had decided to fan themselves with newspaper. Geralene looked at Breaker. At that moment, Danny tottered to her and collapsed in her arms. She hugged him tight and stood, simultaneously offering Breaker the flashlight that now hung from her little finger. "Wait," he said, rising and dug the key out. She glared at him. "He's just a little kid." Breaker awkwardly took the flashlight in the same hand that held the shotgun, aimed the beam at Danny's face, and touched the key between his eyes. No reaction. He put the key away and took the flashlight in a firmer grip. "This tunnel thing just isn't gonna work," he said. "There's too many blind spots, too many branches, and it's already been invaded. We have to go back to the basement." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Duh, what was your first clue, Sherlock?" He ignored her, cocking his head, listening. "Wings," he whispered. "If I'm right, we're in deep shit." "Bats," Geralene shot back. "I think I heard them before." He aimed the flashlight at her feet. "See those?" he said. She looked down. "Salvation Army retreads? You got a problem with that?" He shook his head. "Your feet, Geralene. If you have ever run fast in all your life, run faster now." He pumped the shotgun. "I'll cover you to the basement." "What? How come? How about the others?" He aimed the light at the other tunnel. "We should be expecting them about now." A new noise arose, the panting and squealing of humans on the run. In a few seconds, Roach and Martell, then Irene and Uncle Willie, scrambled past on a mad rush back to the basement, tripping, falling, stumbling into the walls, climbing over each other. "Wings!" Irene wailed in passing. "Some of them got goddamn wings!" Breaker hooked the gun across one elbow and worked the key out of its pouch once more.
"Seal the hole as soon as you get in,"
he said, and pushed it toward her.
"You've seen me do it."
She hesitated, then took it without a word.
"Go,"
Breaker said, and she went. From behind, questing fingers touched his hair, his shoulders. He spun, extending the butt of the shotgun, and smashed it across the man's bloody face. The man staggered back, his hands still pawing at the air. Blood spiked with broken teeth drooled down his chin. The woman was faster, able to get a firm purchase in Breaker's hair. He turned the shotgun in his hands, took it by the barrel, and with a short prayer that it would not go off by itself, plowed the butt of it against her throat. Her tongue popped out like a fat blue popsicle, and her head lawed all the way back between her shoulder blades, her broken neck bones grating against each other as she fell away. But she would live, he knew. The parents of that kid Danny would bumble about like robots down here until their muscles began to rot from the bones, and only when their eyes had decayed sufficiently for the poison to leak out would they find rest. The salesman was powerful, but even he could not deny the mastery of death itself. Breaker sprinted down the tunnel toward the basement. The whirring of wings approaching from behind was loud, punctuated now by the flopping of oversized feet against rock. The salesman had been busy outside, very busy making these things. Perhaps every single mineshaft under this town was loaded with them. To Breaker, it would be no surprise, like any good salesman, you have to keep knocking on doors to find the right buyer. And maybe that was why Harrison, whose blood was running dry in the key, had dubbed the evil one just that, the salesman. The guy just never knew when to give up. For 2,000 years, he had tracked the last key of the 7. Yet here he was in Wormwood with his bag of samples and his hearty handshake, knocking on doors until people got weary of the pitch and finally started buying his wares. Cordelia had been the first customer tonight. Any of the others could be next. The beating of wings became like the roar of a hive full of gigantic bees, all of them mad and full of venom. Breaker had been under fire from these before, but never in such a small space. The first time he had heard them in the year 1917, they sounded like the furious buzz of the French daisy cutters, the artillery shells that exploded on the ground to release 100 whirring pieces of shrapnel that would chew off your legs at the ankles if you couldn't find a hole to dive into, or a tree that wasn't already shattered by bombs. It was the winged demons that killed Harrison, demons cut from the same satanic mold as the ones pursuing Breaker now. Actually, upon Breaker now. From pure instinct, he turned as he ran and fired nearly straight upward. The demon's wings were only a thin green membrane stretched across skeletal arms that would go flapping like a runaway window shade when pierced. Breaker heard wings snap after the shot, and 2 demons thumped against the walls of the tunnel. Not quite like Danny's parents, these would drag about on their shriveled wings and brittle claws until they rotted into a form of ash. He could see in front of the wildly jiggling flashlight that Geralene and the kid were crouched together, waiting for Irene to crawl through to safety. Uncle Willie, holding himself upright by clinging to the wall, had not even begun the journey. And how many shells were left in the shotgun? There was no time to stop and check. Geralene turned her face to Breaker, her green eyes wide and afraid. "Hold them off," she said, and turned away. "Irene," she shouted, "if you don't get your fat ass out of the way right now, there's going to be a lot of dead people out here." Irene zipped out of sight. "Now you," Geralene said to the boy, but he clung to her, silently shaking his head. She motioned at Willie, who dropped like a sack of concrete and scampered through. "No problemo, senor, worthless drunk or not." "Now you," she said, and peeled Danny away from herself. "Don't worry about your mommy and daddy. We'll save them too. Just go." He dropped on all fours and clawed through the rubble. Breaker jerked as talons grabbed at the crown of his head, tweezing hair out, cutting edges in his scalp. The stink of the flying ones was like damp and moldy rags, horrible. Again he hurled the flashlight at Geralene. Again she missed an impossible catch. Talons pricked his shoulders, jabbed his thighs. He lashed out with the shotgun, but connected only with unimportant meaty parts. The noise of the things was one huge hum now. Wings and dozens of them beaded his body as he was dragged to a stop. His feet were jerked apart. too far apart to maintain balance. With a grunt of effort as he fell forward, he twisted himself over onto his back, jabbing the gun at the blur of wings. His shoulder blade slammed down hard on the floor of the shaft. No big deal. He assumed he would be dead soon. At least he had passed the key along. Or had he? He opened his mouth to shout. It wasn't over, couldn't be over. There was one thing left to do. The stampede of demons who had not come, equipped with the optional flight package, became a kind of thunder in its own right. They filled the tunnel. In response to his open mouth, Breaker got a cold, lumpy stalk of beat down his throat, making him gag. He crunched his teeth together and bit it off. The offending demon protested it with only a series of hisses, while Breaker twisted his head to spit it out. But by then, the demon had turned to ash, and Breaker wound up swallowing most of it. He heard Geralene shout out. The weight on his chest and stomach and legs shifted. Heavy here, light there, heavy here again. He realized that he was absolutely pinned to the ground by the weight of the things. It all shifted again, and he was miraculously able to sit up and shake the rest of it away. "Your hand," Geralene said. "Pull on me." He gave her the requested hand, and he pulled. Never, he recognized dazedly, never had the demons come so close to killing him. Geralene pulled him to his feet. With the key in her other hand, she continued to hack at the air and everything in it. He found his voice. "Go on through, Jerry, go on through." "You go through, Breaker," she said, and pushed him down onto his knees. "And don't call me Jerry either." He went, not really caring. How extraordinary it was, if just for a moment, to have someone else in charge. He shuttled through the hole and handed the flashlight to the first pair of hands he saw. The shotgun was snatched from him. No surprise in that, considering that Roach had decided it was his even before the whole tunnel fiasco came to pass. After he stood, Breaker dropped wearily again and leaned back through the hole. Martell had received the flashlight and went down on his knees beside him. "You know," Martell whispered moistly into his ear, "little Miss Geralene is one tough young lady." Breaker jerked away. "Advice, deputy," he said. "Good friends always call her Jerry. She hates formality." Martell, his face still smeared green and brown from his stupid, lengthy excursion outside, winked at him. "I copy a Roger on that one, Chief, and hey," Breaker raised his eyebrows. "Hey, what?" "When I write up my report on this, I'll mention you in a good way. I know you're from New York and all that, but I'll make you look good anyhow, for the papers and stuff." Thank you," Breaker said. "Thank you very much." Was he kidding? Not really. In the old war, it had been simple. Homespun kids like this who fought and died. Martell was a doofus who fancied himself to be a moderate-sized fish in a medium-sized pond. Great leaders had lived and died with bigger delusions than that. "Come on, Jerry!" Martell cheered. "Come on through, Jerry!" She dropped to her haunches and wriggled backward through the hole, where the wind of 100 wings blew a furious gale of dust, still chopping at the demons. Martell reached out, took hold of her rearmost belt loop, and jerked her through. She tumbled onto the cement floor, then rocked to her feet. "Do it!" she said, extending the key to Breaker. He snatched it from her hand. "Give me light!" he grunted at Martell, and jerked the flashlight from his hand. "Now get back!" Martell pulled away. Roach crowded forward, pushing the stench of his armpits into Breaker's nose. "Give me a shot!" he shouted over the noise. "Breaker, move your ass and give me a shot!" Breaker shook his head. He trained the flashlight on the key, ready to thumb the orb open, but let out an involuntary gasp instead. The key was slick with blood. He swiveled the light onto Geralene's hands, shiny with blood. She looked at them, her eyes widening. I didn't know it was open," she cried. "Breaker, I didn't know." He looked at the key again. The small hole was partially open. The last of Harrison's blood mix could create maybe one small drop, but no more. "Wipe your hands on the edge of the hole someplace," he said, but his voice was devoid of hope. It took a decent-sized drop to seal even a small window. If the drop was disturbed or just plain wasn't enough as it dried, the seal would vanish. It had happened before. She scrubbed both hands on the jagged, dirty rim of the hole. A fantastically ugly demon shoved his head through just then. Geralene squealed, falling back, then lunged forward again and slapped it neatly across the face. Her handprint remained, beginning to sizzle. The demon performed a hasty retreat, hissing. All three of the yellow eyes on its jaw, nose, and forehead blazing with anger.
Has to be done,
Breaker groaned, leaned forward, and shook the last drop out. Twin lines of sparkling red fire traced the crumbly insides of the hole and met at the top. A two-fingered claw was jabbed through, en route to Breaker's hair, and instantly turned to ash and smoke. Breaker stood. Sweat sparkled on his face.
That ought to hold, he panted. So much for the mines.
Roach dropped to a crouch suddenly.
Hey!
He shouted through the hole.
What are you gonna do now, you ugly fuckers?
He jabbed the shotgun at them.
Don't shoot,
Breaker warned him.
Just look at these pinheads,
Roach howled, laughing.
Who's scared of them anyway? Not me.
We need to look for other openings down here,
Breaker said above the noise of Roach's glee.
We can't seal it, but we can sure as hell guard it.
Roach's tone suddenly changed.
You!
He shouted.
Here's for 4 years of minimum wage at your stinking cafe.
Breaker straightened in sudden alarm. He dropped to look through the hole. The guy, that kid, Danny's father, had pushed through the demon somehow and was glaring in, the exposed half of his brain shining and bloody, his face dripping. Breaker swung out to knock the shotgun aside, but it was far too late.
Eat this,
Roach had bellowed, and now he fired. The cafe owner's entire head blew apart. Thin white liquid simultaneously jetted out of his shattered eyes. It splashed against the perimeter of the hole. The blood sill evaporated into a wisp of gray smoke. Breaker tossed the flashlight aside and took 2 handfuls of Roach's greasy t-shirt. He hauled him upright.
You dumb little bastard,
he snarled in his face.
You just killed us all of us.
He jerked the shotgun out of Roach's hands and shoved him away. Roach crashed down on his elbows as the first demon hand shoved through the hole unharmed.
I didn't know,
he squealed.
Don't be blaming me.
Breaker looked at the others.
Back upstairs,
he said hollowly.
Be quick or be dead.
No one offered an argument, not even Roach. They all turned and ran as the demon horde clawed through. For Breaker and Geralene and Roach, for Martell and Willie and Irene, and for little Danny, the only survivors in a town of the dead, the long struggle was just about over. But not the long night. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 13 and 14 of Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. Pretty action-packed set of chapters here. I really enjoyed the winged demons. That was a pretty intense scene there in the mines. The whole thing with Danny, I was wondering if Danny was going to become part of the story or not. And we did get to the mines here with the characters. I would shoot Roach by now, just saying. Like, if I was in this situation, I would have turned the shotgun on Roach, shot his ass. As much as went on in these chapters, there's not a whole lot to talk about, really. We got a little bit of insight back into Breaker's head, and, you know, it's kind of foreshadowing his plans if things go the way he thinks they're going to go. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody that hasn't seen the movie, but anybody that's seen the movie or read this book, you know what I'm talking about, his plans. And especially whenever he said he had passed the key on, or had he, there was still one more thing he needed to do. I'm guessing they're going to go the route of the movie with that. And, yeah, I don't want to go any further than that, but that's what my guess is. But all in all, I really enjoyed these chapters. They were very intense, very quick read, very fun read. Very, very good imagery by the author. Randall Boyll is amazing, or should I say T.C. Keeper. Very good, very, very good author. Enjoying his writing style. He really puts you in the scene. kind of like William Patterson does. Just great imagery, really puts you there. And that's what makes these scenes so suspenseful and intense for me. And I hope that I'm portraying that to you guys in my narration. The only problem I had with these chapters is there at the end when Roach shot Danny's dad and caused the white light stuff to come out, and it hit the border that they had just made with the blood and destroyed it. If that's the case, why doesn't the salesman just, make a bunch of demons and then execute them at all the areas that have the blood border? If that's all it takes to destroy it. So that was kind of a bad thing the author did there, unless it gets expanded on, and it's only if it's a weak border, since that one was barely enough to make the border. I don't know. He really didn't explain it there. Maybe we'll get more detail on that as they're escaping back upstairs. I don't know. But that thing really, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, wait a second. If they could do that, why doesn't the salesman just do that to all the perimeters that Breaker's made with the blood? It's whatever. All those little force fields. But yeah, guys, really, really fun chapters. We're getting really far into this book. Not a whole lot left now. Can't wait to see how it plays out compared to the movie. I'll be back very soon with more. If you'd like a shout out at the end of any of these uploads, just let me know in the comment section. If you want to say happy birthday to somebody, happy anniversary, hello, or just a shout out in general, let me know, and I'll throw it in here at the end of any of these uploads that I do. For instance, one of our subscribers here on the channel, Anton Banks, wanted me to tell everybody that he's writing a fan fiction Child's Play original Chucky versus Child's Play remake Chucky fan fiction novel, where Andy's got an older brother named Tavon Barkley. And from what I understand, Andy would have the good guy and Tavon would have the buddy. And just go from there, and apparently they'd end up fighting. So, pretty cool. Just have fun writing that, man. Always keep writing if that's what you love to do. And I can't wait to read it and see who wins between OG Chucky versus remake Chucky. Okay, Slashaholics, I'll see you really soon. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening.
Pleasant dreams.
And I'll see you in the next one.